All right, you ready?
Do it.
Okay, stay still.
I'm standing!
In a world where family is meant to provide love and support, it's unthinkable that anyone could commit such horrific acts against their own. Yet, these evil killers prove that darkness has no bounds. One chilling case is that of Phillip Snider. What he did will leave you questioning the very essence of family. Let's explore convicts who turned against their own.
My 2-week-old is not in her sleeper. Her passy is on the floor.
A mother's desperate 911 call from inside this Georgia home, 40 miles southeast of Atlanta.
She's not in her sleeper. She's not here. I've looked everywhere.
In October 2017, the small town of Newton County, Georgia was rocked by the tragic disappearance of 2-week-old Kalia McNab. Kalia, who had been born prematurely on September 23rd and weighed only 5 pounds at birth, was reported missing on the morning of October 7th when her mother, Courtney Bell, called the Newton County Police Department to report her infant daughter missing from their trailer. This incident sent shockwaves through the community, as Kalia's disappearance quickly became a cause for concern.
15-day-old Kalia McNab, home just days ago from the hospital, is missing. The 911 operator keeps Kalia's mother, Courtney Bell, on the phone.
The search for Kalia was intensified. With the help of local volunteers, law enforcement, and canine units, authorities conducted an extensive search around the area where the family lived. However, on October 8th, one day after Kalia was reported missing, the search took an even more sinister turn. Search teams, who were diligently combing through the trailer park where the family resided, stumbled upon a shocking and tragic discovery. Kalia's body, wrapped in blue cloth and placed under a log in a wooded area just a quarter mile away from her home, was found.
But I want my kid back, man. That's my child, man. I want my kid, man.
The next morning, in this wooded area adjacent to the family's mobile home park, searchers make a heartbreaking discovery.
As the investigation continued, authorities swiftly zeroed in on Christopher McNab, Kalia's father, as the primary suspect in the case. On October 17th, he was formally charged with a slew of offenses related to Kalia's death, including malice murder, felony murder, and concealing a death. Several months later, on January 1st, 2018, Courtney Bell, Kalia's mother, was also charged in the case. The charges against her included concealing a death, false statement, and tampering with evidence.
Now, more than a year and a half after their daughter's tragic death, mother and father are sitting side by side in court as the state of Georgia seeks justice for baby Kalia.
In 2019, Christopher McNab was convicted of 8 charges, including first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and tampering with evidence. During the sentencing hearing, Judge John M. Ott addressed Christopher directly and asked him what sentence he would impose upon the guilty party if he were innocent. Without hesitation, Christopher stated that the maximum sentence would be appropriate. To the shock of everyone in the courtroom, Judge John M. Ott decided to impose that very sentence on Christopher.
Then, 3 months after the murder, Kalia's mother, Courtney Bell,
was also found guilty in relation to Kalia's death. While pleading guilty to the murder charge, Courtney acknowledged her substance addiction as a sickness and expressed her love for her babies. However, her remorseful words did little to mitigate her crime severity.
is also in front of a judge answering for her alleged role in Kalia's death.
During her sentencing hearing, Courtney Bell expressed her regret and remorse for her actions. She claimed that she did her best to be a good mother despite her struggles with substance addiction. In 2023, the Georgia Supreme Court overturned Courtney's conviction, ruling that there was not enough evidence to support the jury's verdict.
Count 1, murder in the second degree. Count 2, cruelty to children in the second degree. And count 3, contributing to the deprivation of a minor, felony.
The prosecution's theory revolved around the notion that Courtney was a bad mother for allowing Christopher McNab, the child's father, to live in the trailer with Kalia and the other children. They argued that Courtney's actions contributed to the neglectful environment that led to Kalia's passing. However, Courtney's attorneys refuted these claims, arguing that there was no evidence linking Courtney's conduct to her daughter's death.
What kind of drugs did you use?
Weed.
And then, okay.
I've been clean for the longest.
Yeah.
Courtney's attorneys argued that the prosecution relied on a flawed theory that painted her as a bad mother. They argued that there was no evidence to support the notion that Courtney's actions directly caused her daughter's death. The court ultimately determined that the prosecution failed to show any evidence linking Courtney's conduct to her daughter's death. Courtney Bell's sentence was overturned, and she was released after serving time in prison. However, Christopher McNab remains behind bars, facing the consequences of his actions. Christopher McNab's tragic crime left a community devastated, but the next case is just as chilling. Matthew Ponomarenko, a man whose violent actions towards his own family reveal a terrifying and senseless act of destruction.
Matthew Ponomarenko called 911, told a dispatcher he killed his son inside the family's living room. We've chosen not to air that call, but in it, the father says he beat his son to death with a baseball bat.
On March 25, 2021, a shocking incident unfolded in Parma, Ohio, when 34-year-old Matthew Ponomarenko called 911 and confessed to murdering his 5-year-old son, Jax. The dispatcher immediately dispatched officers to the scene, where they discovered a horrific crime scene inside Matthew's home.
From the Russell Avenue home of Matthew Ponomarenko chilled me to the bone. The caller, allegedly 31-year-old Ponomarenko, admits to beating to death with a baseball bat.
Upon arrival, police found Matthew standing in his front yard, seemingly unaffected by what he had just done. Inside the house, police officers found Jax's lifeless body, with multiple blunt force trauma injuries to his head and face. The devastating discovery left everyone in disbelief, and Matthew was arrested and charged with aggravated murder, kidnapping, and endangering children.
His 5-year-old son, Jax, but he wouldn't respond when the 911 operator asked him when or why. He'd only say he was hearing voices, but he didn't elaborate.
As investigators delved into the case, they discovered that Matthew had a history of putting his son Jax in danger. In 2017, Matthew pleaded no contest to a child endangerment case in which he left Jax in the middle of a road, yelled at people in the street, and admitted to using meth and PCP. Jax, Matthew's 5-year-old son, was autistic and nonverbal. He communicated through a tablet.
In 2019, Cuyahoga County conducted an investigation into, quote, parenting issues with the Ponomarenkos, but that case was subsequently closed.
After Jax's lifeless body was found in their home, investigators began their search for answers. What they found was shocking: evidence of mistreatment and torture. The crime scene revealed scenes of severe physical mistreatment, leaving no doubt that Jax had endured unimaginable suffering at the hands of his own father.
First, we'll go to a Zoom from County Jail, case number 658361, Matthew Ponomarenko.
Due to the severity of Matthew's crime, he was eligible for the death penalty if convicted. However, 2 years after confessing to murdering his son, Matthew pleaded guilty to aggravated murder, kidnapping, and endangering children. During the sentencing hearing, the prosecution, Michael O'Malley, presented chilling details of the events that unfolded on that fateful day. He told the court that Matthew brutally beat and killed his own son.
I'm standing!
All right, we're going to take a break. Deputy, take him into the holding cell, please.
Matthew also had the opportunity to address the court, and his words left a mark on all who listened. In a somber tone, he said, "I'd like to say I'm sorry. It was a small gesture, but it offered little comfort to Jax's family, who had lost their loved one." The judge presiding over the case handed down a sentence that would serve as a reminder of the gravity of the crimes. Matthew was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum term of 45 years before he would be eligible for parole. Matthew Ponomarenko's crime was horrifying, but the next case takes us to a shocking betrayal within a prominent family. Alex Murdaugh, a once respected lawyer whose web of lies and greed led to the brutal murders of his wife and son.
This is where Alex Murdaugh's life unraveled on June 7th, 2021.
This is your wife and son?
Richard Alexander Alex Murdaugh was a prominent attorney in South Carolina, known for his legal achievements and ties to the powerful and influential. However, behind the facade of wealth and status, whispers of secrets and scandals lurked beneath the surface. On July 8, 2015, 19-year-old nursing student Stephen Smith was found dead 15 miles from Murdaugh's estate in Moselle. His death was initially ruled a hit and run, but suspicions soon arose. As an openly gay man in a small southern town, Stephen's case quickly became the talk of the community.
The investigation revealed no answers as to what happened and who was responsible. It was an extremely tragic loss for his family.
As the investigation progressed, rumors began to circulate that Stephen had been in a romantic relationship with Buster, the older son of the Murdaugh family. This revelation sparked speculation about the possibility of a cover-up involving other members of the Murdaugh family. In the aftermath of Stephen's death, several witnesses were interviewed, and their statements raised even more questions. They alleged that Buster and Stephen had been in a romantic relationship, further fueling suspicions about the nature of the incident.
Then, all of a sudden, it became one of the stories linked to the Murdaughs and linked to the nation's obsession with justice.
With rumors swirling, many began to question whether the Murdaughs were covering up the truth to protect their reputation and maintain their grasp on power. As of November 2024, there have been no indictments or charges issued in the mysterious murder of Stephen Smith. Despite the ongoing investigation, Buster Murdaugh has publicly denied any involvement in the case, dismissing rumors of his alleged involvement.
She literally helped raise Alex Murdaugh's sons, Paul and Buster.
In 2018, the 57-year-old died after a fall at the Murdaugh estate.
On February 2, 2018, the family's longtime housekeeper, Gloria Satterfield, passed away after suffering a severe head injury. Initially, the incident was labeled as a trip and fall, but no autopsy was performed on Gloria. However, in June 2021, the investigation into her tragic death was upgraded to a criminal investigation.
It was kind of a sad, touching moment when you see Mallory and her boyfriend. I think it's the last moment that anybody captured an image of her alive.
The youngest of the Murdaugh boys, Paul Murdaugh, found himself in hot water in February 2019. He was charged with 3 felonies after his friend Mallory Beach died in a boating accident. Paul, who was driving the boat, had a blood alcohol level of .286, 3 times over the legal limit.
County Deputy Sheriff Stephen Domino was one of the first on the scene. After Domino got Mallory's distraught boyfriend Anthony Cook into his patrol car.
According to Connor Cook, one of the teens on board the boat when Mallory Beach died, Alex Murdaugh had encouraged him to protect Paul during the investigation. This allegation sparked an inquiry by SLED, the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, into whether the police had charged Paul in relation to Mallory's death due to pressure.
Maggie and Paul were murdered on Carlton County property in June of 2021. The 1,700-acre property was used as a hunting lodge for the family.
However, despite all the legal troubles that the Murdaugh family might have encountered, they're nothing compared to what happened on June 7, 2021. At 10:06 p.m., Alex Murdaugh called 911 from his cell, reporting that he had found his 22-year-old son Paul and 52-year-old wife Maggie near the dog kennels at the Murdaugh family hunting lodge in Islandton.
Investigators interviewed Murdaugh in a patrol car.
My boy over there, I could see it was...
When the police arrived at the scene, they found Paul and Maggie shot with at least 2 different weapons. They spoke to Alex at the scene, who claimed at the time of the shooting he had been visiting his ill mother. Yet, the detectives' investigation soon focused on Alex Murdaugh for the murders of his wife and son.
He was indicted on dozens more charges for defrauding clients out of millions of dollars. And then in July of 2022, more than a year after the grisly murders,
nearly 1 year after the devastating murders, Alex Murdaugh found himself at the center of a maelstrom of controversy and suspicion. The prosecution put forth a compelling argument, claiming Alex's motive for committing these heinous crimes was to distract from the various financial crimes that were about to come to light. It was alleged that Alex sought to garner public sympathy and divert attention away from his wrongdoings.
At the kennels at 8:44 p.m. on the night Maggie and Paul were murdered.
I was.
Come here, Baba.
Come here, Cash. Come here, Baba. Cash.
You continued lying after that night, did you not?
But once I lied, I continued to lie. Yes, sir.
On March 2, 2023, Alex Murdaugh stood trial for the murders of his wife, Maggie, and their son, Paul. After an extensive legal process, a jury found him guilty on both counts, handing down 2 consecutive life sentences. The verdict was met with mixed emotions, as some felt justice had been served, while others remained skeptical of the prosecution's claims.
The shooter's covered in blood. The shooter's gun is covered in blood. Common sense thing here is there were 2 shooters.
Alex Murdaugh appealed to the state Supreme Court despite his conviction. His fate currently remains in the hands of the highest court in South Carolina. While his sentence brings closure to the case, many questions remain unanswered. Alex Murdaugh's shocking betrayal of his own family left a trail of devastation, but the next case is just as haunting. Phillip Snider, a man whose violent actions, fueled by anger and obsession, led to a senseless and brutal crime.
Phillip Snider and his wife Roberta, known as Bobby, both in their 70s, lived here on St. Abigail Street until Bobby's brother finds out she's missing.
In a small town in Ohio, a disturbing case unfolded. Phillip Snider, a 73-year-old man, claims his wife Roberta died unexpectedly while they were on a road trip to Graceland. However, the details of this story raise suspicions and leave investigators questioning what really happened.
She choked on a phlegm. She'd been choking for quite a year.
He says she died in this truck when they got to Memphis. Phil was taking Bobby, a lifelong Elvis Presley fan.
Initially, Phillip told Roberta's loved ones they were traveling to Memphis when the tragedy occurred. He claimed that they flagged down a passing ambulance in a restaurant parking lot, and the ambulance took Roberta's body away. According to Phillip, Roberta was subsequently cremated.
You remember the checkers, passing the checkers?
Yeah, I think it could have been checkers, maybe.
Police thumbed through his receipts looking for clues.
We're trying to find your wife.
However, the Hartford police in Ohio, where Phillip and Roberta resided, began questioning Phillip's claims. They contacted the authorities in Memphis, where Phillip alleged Roberta had passed away, but no one could locate her body. Faced with mounting evidence, the detectives confronted Phillip. Phillip's initial story crumbles, and he changes his story. He now claims that Roberta died while they were in between Columbus and Cincinnati, while they were on their way to Memphis.
They move to the kitchen, where Phil goes through Bobby's purse. He finds her license. That's the breaking point for Chief Larry Dordia.
Because Roberta wanted to be with nature and not on someone's shelf, Phillip told the detectives he threw Roberta's body off a bridge on I-40 in Tennessee. However, when drivers and search teams scoured the area, they didn't find any sign of Roberta. With Phillip's constantly changing narrative and the absence of Roberta's body, investigators are left searching for the truth. They work tirelessly to piece together the events leading up to Roberta's disappearance and death.
Oh my goodness, I feel so bad. I feel so bad. I'm so sorry, you guys.
As the investigation into Roberta's disappearance continued, Phillip attempted to take his own life. However, family members were able to intervene and save him. While Phillip was in the hospital recovering from his attempted suicide, investigators descended on his and Roberta's home in Hartville.
Changes everything for her husband, Phil.
He's looking at a red bin.
There's no body here, but there's a very bad smell in this tote.
The canine hits on this red container.
He won't leave it.
Investigators were confident that they could find answers in the couple's home. Evidence was mounting against Phillip, and detectives were determined to gather more evidence against him. Among the items searched in the house, cadaver dogs stumbled upon a piece of Roberta's sweater stained with human blood.
He came back to it three times.
Police find what looks like blood inside of it. Plastic bags with possible blood and the front of a sweatshirt cut out with Hartville, Ohio on it.
The DNA on the sweater matched Roberta's, confirming her connection to the bloodstain. This piece of evidence further strengthened the case against Phillip. The detectives, already skeptical of his version of events, were even more convinced that he was responsible for Roberta's disappearance.
Police confront him with the new evidence.
I didn't cut the shirt. I didn't cut any shirt off.
Well, the science says that's not true.
The web of lies continue to frustrate investigators.
Determined to get to the bottom of the case, the detectives decided to pay a visit to Phillip at the hospital. Once again, Phillip changed his account and claimed that Roberta had died while at home in Hartville. According to Phillip, he had disposed of her body in a trash bag and thrown it into the Tennessee River.
Tennessee River in Benton County, 150 miles northeast of Memphis, turned up nothing.
You're guilty of something.
I'm not. I didn't kill my wife.
Still searching for the truth, police get creative.
However, the detectives didn't believe Phillip's story. They realized he had previously been inconsistent in his statements and suspected he was trying to cover his tracks. Determined to get to the bottom of the case, the detectives devised a cunning plan. The detectives recruited a 50-year-old undercover officer from the Hartville police force. This undercover operative, a woman, would approach Phillip under the guise of friendship and gain his trust.
Walks into the Burger King in Hartville.
Now, do they have good coffee here? Really?
She strikes up a conversation with Phil.
Yeah, I just got divorced in Cincinnati. I got 2 grown kids.
Over the next few weeks, the undercover officer began meeting with Phillip for coffee on a daily basis. They shared stories about their personal lives, and the officer even confided in him about her dying mother, who was supposedly suffering in hospice. She even went so far as to express her desire for her mother to pass already, and even considered ending her life.
Recording everything on a hidden camera. She starts showing up at Burger King at 6 a.m. when Phil and his friends meet for coffee every day.
We have assigned seats here.
You do, don't you?
As the officer continued to persist with her emotional tactics, the pressure mounted on Phillip. The constant reminders of his wife's death and the undercover officer's feigned vulnerability became too much for him to bear. Finally, Phillip confessed the truth behind Roberta's disappearance.
Phil starts to talk about how Bobby died. This time, he says she was asleep on the couch, fell off and hit her head, and she landed on a plastic tarp on the floor she had out for arts and crafts.
On January 2nd, 2017, Roberta and Phillip were involved in a heated argument. The argument escalated, and Roberta made the decision to go to bed while sitting on a love seat. The following morning, Phillip woke up and went downstairs for coffee. On his return, he reportedly discovered that Roberta was still asleep. In a chilling twist, Phillip grabbed a drop cloth and placed it over Roberta's head. He then took a 2-pound steak hammer and struck her repeatedly in the head.
He pleaded guilty to murdering his wife of 53 years, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a corpse. As part of the deal, he had to tell police where they can find Bobby's body.
After committing the murder, Phillip decided to dispose of Roberta's body. He wrapped a plastic bag around her head, rolled her body in a strap, and placed her in a plastic container. Phillip then drove with her remains, disposing of her in various places between Ohio and Tennessee. In August 2018, Phillip pleaded guilty to aggravated murder, tampering with evidence, and gross abuse of a corpse. The judge sentenced him to life in prison with parole eligibility after 20 years. Phillip Snider's violent crime was a terrifying act of rage, but the next case is just as unsettling. Carl Karlsen, a man whose cold and calculated actions led to a senseless tragedy.
That had actually happened to Carl Karlsen before. Back in 1991, Carl's first wife, Christina, Levi's mother, also died in a tragic accident.
On New Year's Day 1991, firefighters responded to a fire at Carl and Christina Karlsen's home in Murphy's, California. The call came in around 2:30 p.m., and the first responders arrived on the scene to find Carl standing outside, covered in soot and burns. Carl informed them that he had successfully rescued his 3 children from the blaze, but unfortunately, his wife Christina was still trapped inside.
In a tragic accident, a house fire.
Looks good, you guys.
Carl and Christina were living here in Murphy's, California, with their 3 young children, says her sister Colette.
Firefighters entered the burning structure with the sole purpose of finding Christina. Their search led them to the bathroom, where they made the devastating discovery of her body. Christina had been tragically trapped in the bathroom, unable to escape the flames that had engulfed the room.
Karlsen had taken out a $200,000 life insurance policy on his wife.
That doesn't sound like a lot by today's standards, but in 1991, it was a lot of money.
The investigation into the fire began immediately, with a team of fire investigators working tirelessly to determine the cause of the blaze. Their initial findings pointed towards a fire that had originated outside the bathroom, where Christina had been bathing, and Carl was working in the garage. This theory led investigators to believe Christina had been unaware and helpless in the face of the fire's relentless advance.
When I found out that it was boarded, I just was in shock.
Karlsen told investigators the pane had broken, so he temporarily covered the window to keep the cold out.
However, there were several things at the scene that raised suspicion. The window in the bathroom where Christina was killed was boarded up, causing investigators to question Carl's version of events. Carl offered an explanation for the missing window pane. He claimed that they could not afford to put in a pane.
Karlsen told police that Christina was in the bathroom when some kerosene that had spilled suddenly erupted in flames.
Additionally, the odor of kerosene was prominent in the home, leading investigators to question why the fuel scent was so overpowering. Once again, Carl seemed to have an explanation for this. He claimed that he accidentally spilled a container of kerosene while attempting to heat the home days earlier, and it somehow fit into the rug.
Was finally having suspicions of her own, according to police. One big reason? Police say she'd found out Carl had recently taken...
As the investigators were still piecing together the events surrounding Christina's death and the fire, it came as a surprise when Carl suddenly moved to Seneca, New York, with his daughters Erin and Katie and son Levi. This decision raised even more suspicions among Christina's family, as they firmly believe Carl had a hand in her demise. However, the official manner of death for Christina was ruled as an accident in March 1991.
A $1.2 million life insurance policy on her, although Karlsen later denied it. She agreed to wear a wire, pretending to Carl.
This ruling left Christina's family feeling frustrated and disillusioned. They knew in their hearts that something more sinister was at play, but their attempts to bring the truth to light fell short. The insurance company, which was the beneficiary of Christina's life insurance policy, paid a hefty sum of over $215,000 to Carl after the manner of death was concluded.
While he was underneath it, the truck slipped off the jacks that were holding it up.
Okay, we're going to start CPR, okay?
Yeah, Carl, they want to start CPR. Do you know CPR?
For Carl, it appeared he had moved on with his life. He settled on a farm and married Cindy Best. It seemed that tragedy had finally passed by the Karlsen family. However, on November 20th, 2008, Cindy called 911, informing the dispatcher that a truck had fallen off the jack and that her 23-year-old stepson Levi was stuck underneath, not breathing.
It was all ruled a tragic accident. A once-in-a-lifetime tragedy.
When the police and the paramedics arrived at the scene, it became evident that Levi was already dead. The tragedy had struck the Karlsen family once again, leaving everyone in disbelief and grief. According to Carl, Levi had been crushed under the weight of the vehicle, which weighed half a ton.
But then in 2012, another member of the family contacted the New York police. That's when Lieutenant Investigator John Clear got involved for the first time and started checking out.
However, as the story unfolded, suspicions began to grow. The detectives investigating the death soon learned that Carl had taken out life insurance policies on both Christine, his deceased first wife, and Levi just days before their passing. Even more suspicious was the fact that Carl was the beneficiary of both policies.
Now living apart from Karlsen, was finally having suspicions of her own, according to police. One big reason? Police say she'd found out Carl.
4 years later, in 2012, the case took an unexpected turn. The detectives made contact with Cindy, Carl's estranged wife, who provided them with crucial information. Cindy revealed that there were discrepancies in Carl's version of events, with the evidence stacking up against Carl. The detectives decided to reopen Levi's death investigation. They began piecing together the clues, unraveling a web of deceit that pointed directly to Karlsen as the prime suspect.
Exclusive, you're about to hear part of that conversation for the first time.
Can you just tell me how things went that day so that I know in my head?
In an exclusive interview with the detectives, Cindy painted a disturbing picture of Carl's abusive and controlling behavior. She described him as a narcissistic man who exerted total control over all aspects of her life. Determined to uncover the truth, Cindy decided to take a bold step and wore a wire, allowing her to record conversations about Carl and Levi's death.
If you pushed the truck and you said yes.
I didn't push the truck, I said I had nothing to do, but I said I took advantage of the situation once it happened.
As Cindy spoke to Carl and gathered evidence, she expected a confession. However, to her disappointment, Carl remained steadfast in his denial. Cindy's efforts were not in vain despite the lack of a confession. During the conversation, Carl made a statement that seemed to incriminate himself. This crucial piece of information would pave the way for his eventual arrest.
Please bring Karlsen in for questioning.
So, the reason that they brought you in today to finally talk to you was really over
my son, Levi.
Under intense questioning, Carl's story took a surprising turn. He now claimed that he accidentally dropped the truck on his son Levi, leaving him unconscious. Panicked, Carl fled the scene and called 911 when he returned. However, his story did not add up, and there were inconsistencies in his account. As the pressure mounted, Carl's narrative continued to change, leaving detectives suspicious about his true role in Levi's tragic death.
His lawyer, speaking on his behalf, says he respectfully disagrees with the court's recent decision to allow the jury to hear the recorded conversations Carl Karlsen had with his wife.
Carl Karlsen was charged with second-degree murder in the death of his son. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Carl eventually pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 15 years in prison. It was a bittersweet victory for investigators, knowing that justice had been served, but mourning the loss of an innocent life.
Her office is now actively investigating the death as a homicide and cannot comment on an active investigation. But now, even with Carl Karlsen in jail awaiting trial...
As the case progressed, detectives turned their sights on Carl's deceased wife, Christina. The circumstances surrounding her death had always seemed suspicious, and new evidence began to surface that implicated Carl. After a thorough investigation, it was concluded that Carl had murdered Christina as well.
Carl Karlsen knew his sentence would be 15 to life as he was brought to the Seneca County Courthouse in Waterloo. His family knew it too, and several relatives, including one of his brothers, told us they were let down.
In 2020, Carl's trial for the murder of his wife began. The jury found Carl guilty of first-degree murder, mirroring his prior conviction for his son's murder. Carl's sentence was swift and final: life in prison without the possibility of parole. Carl Karlsen's calculated betrayal was chilling, but the next case reveals an even darker tragedy. Chris Watts, a man whose seemingly perfect family life concealed a horrifying secret.
She was such a good person and such a good wife to him.
He is amazing. I can't tell you how wonderful he is.
How could he have done something like that to her?
The Watts family, consisting of Chris and Shannon Watts and their two daughters, Bella and Celeste, commonly known as Cece, captivated social media with their seemingly perfect lives. Their picture-perfect portrayal of a happily married couple presented an idealized reality. However, behind closed doors, a different story was unfolding that would shock the world.
Look at this.
She just was a ball of love. I don't know. It sounds like too good to be true, but
I know, but it really was.
She really, yeah.
In 2018, Shannon had exciting news to share with her husband. She informed him she was pregnant with their third child, a boy. To support his family, Chris had a successful career at Anadarko Petroleum, working as a petroleum engineer. On the other hand, Shannon took on the role of a stay-at-home mother, managing the family and caring for their two young daughters. However, she had also become involved in the MLM industry, selling a product called Thrive for a company called Lavelle.
That is what a really good friend does. A really good friend knows something's wrong and does that. She got there and there was no answer, so I texted Chris.
On August 13, 2018, the world was shaken by the tragic disappearance of Shannon Watts and her daughters Bella and Cece. In the hours following Shannon's disappearance, Chris acted unemotionally, not worried, and lackadaisical. He seemed unaffected by the situation, leading many to believe he had something to hide. This lack of concern and urgency raised suspicions and fueled speculation among investigators and family members.
This is him at 517.
We can see the garage door open. There's some kind of movement that can be seen.
Park out there on the side and get everything put in.
However, things started to change when Chris's neighbor approached the police with security camera footage, showing Chris leaving and re-entering his house and car several times the night before. The footage raised suspicions as it seemed to contradict Chris's claims that he had spent the entire evening at work.
Watching his reaction when everybody is watching this and then turn and look at him, his demeanor changes almost immediately.
Upon viewing the security camera footage, Chris became visibly nervous. The calm and unbothered demeanor he had maintained up until that point vanished. Instead, he displayed signs of nervousness, fidgeting, and stammering while answering questions from the police.
Police looking for a pregnant Frederick woman and her two children who have seemingly vanished without a trace.
Denver 7's Thomas Hoppe spoke with the woman's husband.
Did you guys get into an argument before she left?
When the detectives investigating Shannon, Bella, and Cece's disappearance questioned Chris Watts, he said he was unaware of their whereabouts. In a heartfelt plea to the media outlets, Chris begged for Shannon and the girls to come home. However, 2 days after their families were reported missing, Chris failed a polygraph examination regarding his wife and daughter's disappearance.
To make them vanish.
You have not shed one tear in 2 days that you've been here. Not one.
After speaking with his father, Chris confessed to the detectives that his wife, Shannon, had killed their daughters in a fit of rage. According to Chris, he had killed Shannon in a fit of anger because he was so upset. However, it later came to light that Chris actually murdered Shannon in cold blood before smothering his two daughters, Bella and Cece. Chris then proceeded to dispose of all three bodies by driving them to his worksite and leaving them in crude oil vats. This act not only demonstrated a disregard for human life, but also revealed a chilling level of planning and premeditation.
From father and husband to triple murder suspect, arrested overnight, Chris Watts is accused of killing his pregnant wife Shanann and their two daughters.
On August 21, 2018, Chris Watts was arrested and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and a slew of other charges. 3 months later, on November 6th, Chris pleaded guilty to the charges against him. He was sentenced to 5 life sentences without parole and an additional 48 years because Shannon was pregnant at the time of her death. Furthermore, Chris received 36 years for tampering with deceased bodies.
The defendant coldly and deliberately ended 4 lives. Not in a fit of rage, not by way of accident, but in a calculated and sickening manner.
Disgustingly, while incarcerated, Chris has gathered a following of lonely women who have written to him, expressing admiration despite his heinous crimes. Chris even has the audacity to make allegations from behind bars, blaming Shannon for everything that occurred and labeling her as a control freak. Unlike Chris Watts, who committed a heinous crime by murdering his family in cold blood, Colby Allen Parker committed an even more disturbing act when he killed and mutilated his grandfather in a horrific incident.
A Florida man is charged with killing his 77-year-old grandfather, Ronald Wells Sr., and cutting off the man's ears. According to the police report, while he was being questioned.
In 2021, the small town of DeLand, Florida was gripped by a shocking case of violence and murder. The local authorities were called to a residence on reports of a stabbing. When police officers arrived on the scene, they were met with a gruesome sight. Colby Alden Parker, a young man covered in blood, was frantically trying to explain what had happened. Nearby lay the body of an older man with multiple stab wounds evident on his body.
About the death, Colby Parker pulled the human ears from his pocket. CBS affiliate WPEC reports the Lake County Sheriff's Office responded to a home in Central Florida.
Colby informed the officers that the person lying nearby was his grandfather. As the officers examined the grandfather's body, they noticed stab wounds all over it. This disturbing discovery raised even more questions. While officers were examining the grandfather, another officer approached Colby for questioning. According to Colby, his grandfather had attempted to hurt him, but he managed to wrestle away the knife and fatally stab his grandfather in the heart.
Saturday night for reports of a man being attacked by his grandfather. According to deputies, Parker claims Wells pulled a knife on him.
The most shocking revelation of the case came when Colby pulled a pair of severed human ears from his pockets. These ears, it later turned out, belonged to his grandfather. Colby had gruesomely cut off the ears of his deceased grandfather after killing him.
To get the knife away, then used it against Wells in what he called self-defense. Investigators say Parker admitted to cutting his grandfather multiple times.
During the investigation, Colby tried to steal a gun from an officer. Additionally, he also attempted to grab a taser, further illustrating his violent behavior. The altercation escalated, and the officers found themselves in a life-or-death struggle. Despite the deployment of a taser, Colby's aggression remained determined.
The butcher's knife also hitting him multiple times with a baseball bat, and they say he also admitted to cutting Wells' ears off and stated he wanted his grandfather to be with his dead grandmother.
As the investigation unfolded, investigators uncovered a disturbing scene within Colby's home. In the main bedroom, they discovered an apron with the words "The Family Butcher" emblazoned on it. Attached to the apron were 2 fake plastic human ears, an eerie discovery. Moving deeper into Colby's living space, investigators stumbled upon a chilling sight. A bloody baseball bat and butcher's knife lay nearby, with blood dripping from the blade. The sight sent shivers down their spines.
Junior?
Yeah. Where's Junior?
Ronnie Junior, right here.
Ronnie? Okay, what is that?
Those are ears.
Based on the evidence gathered, Colby was charged with second-degree murder and assaulting an officer. His bail was denied, ensuring he remained behind bars until his trial. During interviews with investigators, Colby shockingly confessed the truth behind his crimes. He claimed that his grandfather's death was not a random act of violence, but rather a calculated act. Colby's motive was to reunite his grandfather with his deceased grandmother, which he felt was the only way to achieve closure. Colby Alden Parker's chilling crime was a devastating act of violence, but the next case is just as unsettling. Joshua Ambery, a man whose brutal actions were driven by rage, leaving a victim's life shattered.
Skyview 12 shows us the home where Melissa Ambery was stabbed. Now we'll pan over to the house where a neighbor says he spotted that suspect, Joshua Ambery, on his back patio.
A 39-year-old man named Joshua Ambery was arrested in Claremont County, Ohio in November 2022 after allegedly stabbing his mother, 58-year-old Melissa Ambery, several times. The tragic incident unfolded at the Ambery home in Miami Township, where police found Melissa in the basement. Due to the severity of the injuries she sustained, authorities were forced to airlift her by helicopter to the University of Cincinnati Medical Center. However, despite the best efforts of medical professionals, Melissa was pronounced dead upon arriving at the hospital.
That suspect, Joshua Ambery, on his back patio. That's where we pick up from a body camera on a Miami Township police officer.
Police, let me see your hands. Drop the knife.
At the time of the incident, Joshua was under court-imposed community control, a type of probation alternative to incarceration for a previous offense. Under community control, the defendant is given a set of conditions to avoid imprisonment. However, it appears that Joshua's compliance was lacking, as he violently attacked his own mother.
Officers shouted at Ambery to drop the knife several more times while holding him at gunpoint. The officer whose body camera we're watching decides to holster his handgun, pulls out his taser.
You got lethal, I got a taser.
When police arrived at the Ambery home, Joshua had fled the scene, leaving behind the knife he had used to stab her. Officers immediately launched a search for Joshua in the surrounding area. After an extensive search, they eventually found him on the back patio of a nearby home.
Got lethal, I got a taser.
As we zoom in, we can see Ambergy's not listening and holds the knife up in a threatening manner.
Hell's coming at me.
The second officer fires 2 shots.
When officers arrived on the scene, they were greeted by 20-year-old Joshua, who was wielding a knife and refusing to comply with their commands. Despite the officers' repeated commands to drop the knife, Joshua continued to whirl the weapon, posing a significant threat to the safety of both himself and the responding officers. Recognizing the heightened nature of the situation, one police officer made the decision to deploy non-lethal force by using a taser. However, the taser missed Joshua, leaving him still armed with the knife.
2 shots, one of which hits Ambergy in the leg. As he goes down, you can see the knife tumbling away from him in this freeze frame.
Lay down! Lay down! Lay down!
With the situation continuing to escalate, a second police officer felt obligated to take action. In self-defense and to prevent further harm, they fired at Joshua, striking his leg. Joshua was tackled to the ground, immobilized by the gunshot wound. Once Joshua was subdued and on the ground, officers approached and administered immediate medical attention. They applied a tourniquet to his leg to staunch the bleeding and stabilize his condition. With Joshua's life hanging in the balance, officers called for a helicopter to transport him to a nearby hospital for medical treatment.
I talked with Chief Mills about how his officers responded.
When dealing with knives and pipes and things like that we are going to make an attempt to de-escalate.
Joshua was taken to the hospital where he received treatment for his injury. After his release, he was placed in police custody and charged with several offenses related to the confrontation with police. The chief of the Miami Township Police Department addressed the media, calling the outcome of Joshua's arrest unfortunate. However, he emphasized that his officers were forced into the situation and were forced to make split-second decisions.
Gap that we have, the safety gap, we have no other option than to use the force available to us at that time.
The police chief added that one of the officers who responded to the call had contemplated leaving the department due to the psychological trauma they experienced during the encounter. In October of 2023, nearly a year after his arrest, Joshua pleaded guilty to aggravated murder and 1 count of felonious assault on a police officer in a plea deal.
Were the best years of my life I had with Melissa.
During those 42 years, Ted and Melissa Ambery built a beautiful life. 4 kids, 7 grandkids, and a lifetime to spend together.
During the sentencing hearing, Joshua's siblings pleaded with the judge to give their now 40-year-old brother a lengthy prison sentence because of the psychological hurt they have gone through. Jacob, Joshua's brother, told Judge Haddad that he would feel relieved when this was all over and that he hoped to get justice for their mother.
He picked up that knife. Today is the last day you will ever hear my voice, see my face, and look me in the eye.
Powerful words from family members who vowed to cut ties with Joshua.
Judge Haddad listened intently to the heartfelt pleas of Joshua's siblings and considered the profound impact of his actions on their family. He ultimately made the decision to sentence Joshua to 30 years for his mother's murder and 11 years for the assault on the police during his arrest. Furthermore, Judge Haddad ordered that the sentence for the murder of Joshua's mother be served consecutively rather than concurrently. According to Judge Haddad, this decision was made to protect the public and prevent any further harm. While Joshua Ambergy's act of taking his own mother's life is horrible, it pales in comparison to the unimaginable horror of Cynthia Valera's heinous crime.
Police say it was one of the worst child abuse cases they've ever seen. According to investigators, Vera-Casas abused her son Omari and beat him to death 3 years ago.
In 2013, a 9-year-old boy named Omari Vera-Casas lost his young life at the hands of his own mother. Omari's younger sister, who was only 5 years old at the time, witnessed the tragic events and tried to intervene, urging their mother to stop kicking and hitting him. Unfortunately, her pleas were ignored. According to Omari's loved ones, he had been subjected to relentless mistreatment at the hands of his biological mother, Cynthia, over his short life. The autopsy conducted on Omari's body revealed he had sustained severe internal bleeding from blunt force trauma. This devastating discovery shattered any hopes that Omari had fallen from a toy horse, as Cynthia initially claimed.
Casals answered our questions while being taken to jail.
It was an accident. I was disciplining him and I kicked him the wrong way. It was an accident.
When detectives questioned Cynthia about her son's death, she initially denied any involvement. However, as the evidence against her mounted, her claims of innocence began to crumble. The inconsistencies in her statements and the overwhelming physical evidence ultimately led the police to charge Cynthia with murder in relation to Omari's death.
It was recommended Vera-Casas remain jailed on $100,000 cash-only bond.
The state's concurring, and we believe $100,000 cash only.
In an attempt to evade justice, Cynthia tried to claim she was incompetent to stand trial. However, the judge ruled otherwise, determining that she was mentally fit to stand trial. Cynthia's husband, Omari's stepfather, was found guilty of tampering with evidence and acting with reckless disregard for human life. He was sentenced to life in prison.
Is fit to stand trial after allegedly killing her 9-year-old son, Omari. This comes just months after her husband, Stephen Casals, was put behind bars.
Astonishingly, the judge decided to give him a reduced sentence of 14.5 years, as he has already served 9 years in prison. This reduction means that the stepfather will be released in just 5 more years. In May of 2016, Cynthia pleaded guilty to 6 counts, including second-degree murder. She was sentenced to 40 years in prison in a stunning plea deal.
Cynthia Vera-Casas, CR 2014-00203.
During her sentencing, Cynthia spoke of her love for Omari, breaking down in tears as she addressed the judge. Despite her crimes, she expressed her remorse and begged for forgiveness. However, her sister Sylvia, who had adopted Cynthia's surviving children, had a different story to tell.
I will never understand why all this happened, Your Honor. My sister will have to live with that, what she did to her child Omari.
Sylvia addressed the court, expressing her forgiveness towards her sister. However, she made it clear that she wanted to see Cynthia face a long sentence. She shed light on the tender age of Omari at the time of his death, emphasizing that he had dreams and goals that he would never get to fulfill. Cynthia's other children, who saw the assault on Omari, asked Sylvia, "Auntie, can't Omari be fixed? Can't God or the doctor fix him?"
All right.
In a powerful and emotional letter, Cynthia's daughter wrote to the judge, expressing her desire for her mother to remain behind bars. The letter, which was read aloud during the sentencing hearing, left the courtroom in tears. Cynthia's daughter, now 7 years old, bravely expressed her deepest fears and the nightmares that still haunt her. Her words echoed the sentiments of countless victims of domestic violence, urging the judge to keep her mother away to protect her safety and well-being. Cynthia Varela's shocking crime was a moment of unthinkable violence, but the next case is equally disturbing. Omari Jitani, a woman whose brutal actions towards an innocent victim reveal a chilling disregard for life.
January, 40-year-old Omari Jitani pled guilty to the December 2013 murder of her husband, Tony. He was stabbed to death in the couple's North Bexar County home.
On the night of December 5, 2013 at 9:30 p.m., a Bexar County Sheriff's deputy responded to a domestic violence call at the Jitani residence. The deputy arrived to witness a heated altercation between 29-year-old Tony and 38-year-old Omari. Tony, who had expressed a desire to leave, found himself in a confrontation with his wife, who refused to let him leave the house.
Stabbed her husband, 29-year-old Tony Jitani, to death. According to the police report, he was stabbed 17 times, 3 times as emergency responders arrived at the couple's Northwest Bexar County home.
According to deputy statements, Omari grabbed a knife and stabbed Tony multiple times in the upper body. The deputy intervened and tried to subdue Omari, but it was already too late. Tony succumbed to his injuries and was pronounced dead at University Hospital.
She's since changed her mind about that plea.
I am not guilty of what they're saying that I did in cold blood.
In the aftermath of the tragic incident, Omari was arrested and charged with her husband's murder. Her bond was set at $250,000. 3 years later, in February 2016, District Judge Steve Hilbig sentenced Omari to 25 years in prison as part of a plea deal.
I am guilty of defending my life and my children's.
She claims she had ineffective counsel, that her lawyers only wanted to talk about a plea bargain.
During Omari's sentencing hearing, Alfred Jitani, Tony's father, delivered a powerful and emotional statement to the court, addressing his daughter's killer directly. He declared, "I do not forgive you for murdering Tony, my son. I curse you for what you have done. I wish you nothing but terrible things in this life, and that when you die, you burn in hell."
We didn't talk about trial, we didn't talk about strategy, we didn't talk about anything like that.
And that her lawyer, David Christian, rushed her into agreeing to the plea bargain that called for a 25-year prison term.
Tony's mother, Jamal Jitani, also had the opportunity to address Omari. With tears streaming down her face, she expressed her anger and desire for justice. She stated, "I pray that you rot in your prison cell."
And that called for a 25-year prison term.
Christian took exception to Jitani's testimony. He said they went over the plea agreement several times.
Under the laws, Anna Marie is obligated to serve half of her sentence before becoming eligible for parole. However, despite pleading guilty, she sought a new trial 2 months after sentencing. Anna Marie said she had ineffective counsel when she accepted the plea deal.
He testified that she was not rushed into signing. He said that he advised her that given the facts of the case, a plea bargain was in her best interest.
Other than being under immense amount of pressure.
In her request for a new trial, Anna Marie argued that her legal counsel failed to provide adequate representation and advice. She believed that if she had been properly guided, she would have made a different decision regarding the plea deal. However, her attorneys, David Christian and Pat Hancock, insisted that they had thoroughly reviewed the case with Anna Marie and concluded that taking a plea deal was in her best interests.
She was not coerced, threatened, led the wrong way.
Judge Steve Hilbig denied Jitani's motion for a new trial. Her lawyer tells me he'll appeal.
Despite the efforts of her legal team, Judge Hilbig denied Anna Marie's plea for a retrial. The judge deemed the evidence presented insufficient to overturn the initial verdict. Anna Marie's newest attorney spoke to the media, stating that he plans to appeal the recent ruling. This new attorney, who has joined the case amidst much speculation, believes there are valid grounds for an appeal. The horrors these killers unleashed on their own families are beyond comprehension. But the stories don't end here. In our next video on screen, we explore another shocking case that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Don't miss it.